A fist slammed down on the bakery counter. A glass display case cracked from corner to corner. The man in the gray suit leaned in close, his voice low and mean, and told the woman behind the counter she had until Friday. She didn't move, not an inch. Her hand found the wooden rolling pin on the flour board and held it. Outside, cold rain came down in gray sheets. She was 61 years old, 5'2", and she had buried a husband and a business in the same bad year. Her name was Eleanor Prewitt, though everyone in Cottonwood Bend just called her Nell. The suited man smiled and reached across for her wrist. And that was the moment a motorcycle engine roared to life across the street. What that old biker did next would leave the whole dusty town talking for years. Stay with me on this. But to understand what that old biker did, you have to go back a few weeks. Back to before the gray suit ever set foot in her shop. Back to when the worst thing in Nell Prewitt's life was an oven that wouldn't hold its heat. Now here's the thing you need to know about Nell. She had run that little pie shop on the edge of town for 31 years, and for 30 of them her husband Walt had run it with her. He worked the register. He hauled the flour sacks. He told the same 3 jokes to every customer who walked in, and people laughed every time, mostly because Walt laughed first. Then one morning 14 months back, Walt sat down in the kitchen chair to lace up his boots, and he just never got up again. Hard. Quick, they told her. As if that was supposed to help. After that, the shop got quiet, real quiet, the kind of quiet that follows you home. Money got thin, too. Turns out Walt had kept the books, and Nell learned the hard way they'd been carrying more debt than she ever knew. She took out a loan against the building just to keep the doors open. The bank down in the county seat held the note, and every month it got a little harder to pay. She sold pies to the diner. She sold pies at the Saturday market. She stayed up till 2 in the morning with flour to her elbows, and still the numbers wouldn't add up. The only company she had left was a fat, one-eyed rescue hound named Biscuit, who slept under the prep table and thumped his tail whenever she said his name. Believe me, some nights that thump was the best sound in her whole world. Then there was the motorcycle. For about 3 weeks, an old chopper had been parking across the street. Long, black, chrome-worn, soft from 100,000 miles of road. It belonged to a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a boot. Big. Real big. Broad through the shoulders, thick through the neck, gray beard down to the second button of his shirt. Both arms were covered, wrist to shoulder, in tattoos so old they turned the color of a bruise. On the back of that vest was a patch. Nell couldn't read all of it from her window, but she'd lived long enough to know what it meant. Hell's Angels. A man with a life she couldn't begin to imagine. Every afternoon he'd ride up Park and sit at the little iron table outside the closed-down barbershop next door. He never came in. He never bought a thing. He just watched the road like he was waiting on somebody who was never going to show. The town noticed, of course. In a place the size of Cottonwood Bend, a stranger on a chopper is front-page news. The church ladies crossed to the other side of the street when they passed him. Old Merle from the hardware store said he'd probably cased every business on the block. People had opinions. People always do. But Nell watched him from behind her counter, and she didn't see a criminal. She saw a man sitting alone in the heat with nobody to talk to. She saw a man who looked exactly the way she felt on the inside, lonely down to the bone. And one rainy Tuesday, when the sky went dark at 3 and the whole street emptied out, she looked across and saw him still sitting there, getting rained on, not moving, just taking it like the rain was something he figured he deserved. That's when Nell did the thing that started all of it. She had a peach pie cooling on the rack. Fresh out of the oven, still warm, the lattice gone gold. It was meant for the diner order. But she looked at that pie, and she looked at that soaked old man across the street, and something in her chest just wouldn't let it go. So she wrapped it in a clean towel, crossed the empty street, and set the warm pie down in front of the biggest, roughest-looking man she had ever stood next to. He looked up slow, and up close his eyes weren't mean at all. They were tired, gray as river stone, and tired in a way that went back years. "You've been out here 3 weeks," Nell said, because she didn't know what else to say. A person ought to have at least one warm thing in a day like this. He looked at the pie, he looked at her. Then he reached out one huge, scarred hand and laid it flat on the towel, feeling the heat come through. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice came out like gravel in a bucket. "I've got to be honest with you. This is a dangerous thing you've done." Nell laughed. She couldn't help it. "It's a peach pie, mister, not a stick of dynamite." But he didn't laugh. He gave her a rough half-smile, the kind with more sadness in it than joy. "Careful, ma'am. The last woman who fed me a home-cooked meal ended up wearing my ring. 30 years she wore it." He paused, and his jaw worked once. "The road took her from me 2 winters back, so you go on and be careful who you feed. A meal like this, it can turn a man's whole life around. Did mine." Nell didn't know what to say to that. So she just told him her name was Nell, and the shop across the street was hers, and if he ever wanted to come in out of the weather, the coffee was free and the second slice was on the house. He told her his name was Cyrus Marlowe, but everybody who'd ever known him, he said, called him Diesel. And that was the moment everything changed. Because the next afternoon, Diesel Marlowe walked through the door of Nell Pruitt's pie shop for the very first time. He ducked to fit under the frame. Biscuit came out from under the prep table, took one look at this mountain of a man, and instead of barking, that fool dog walked right up and leaned against his leg. Diesel crouched down, all 6.5 feet of him, and scratched that hound behind the ear like they were old friends. "He doesn't do that," Nell said, amazed. "Not with anybody." "Dogs know," Diesel said. "They know who's carrying what." He bought a slice of peach pie. He paid for it too, though she'd said the second one was free. And while he ate it slow, he noticed the way her oven door hung crooked, and the way she had to smack the side of it twice to get the heat to catch. "That's a gas valve," he said. "Cheap fix. I've got tools on the bike." Nell told him no, she couldn't ask that. He told her she hadn't asked. Then he went out to that chopper, came back with a leather roll of wrenches, took his vest off, folded it careful over a chair, and spent the next 2 hours on his knees with his head inside her oven. When he was done, that oven lit on the first try and held its heat steady as a sundae. He wouldn't take a dime for it. He took another slice of pie instead. And that's how it started. That's how a widowed baker and an old Hell's Angel became the strangest pair Cottonwood Bend had ever seen. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He never made a thing of it, just showed up around 3 when the shop went slow. He fixed the wobbling table leg. He oiled the door hinge that had squeaked for a decade. He carried the 40-pound flour sacks in from the delivery truck like they were pillows, and told her a man his age needed the exercise or he'd rust in place. At dusk, when Nell was too tired to do it herself, he took Biscuit's leash off the hook and walked that old hound down to the dry riverbed and back. You'd see them sometimes, the huge old biker and the fat one-eyed dog, moving slow down the road while the sky went orange behind the mesas. Diesel talked to that dog the whole way. Nobody ever heard what he said. And slow, real slow, he started to talk to Nell too. He told her about the road, 50 years of it. He told her about the wife he'd lost, a woman named Ruth who'd fed him a plate of beans and cornbread in a roadside kitchen in 1974 and looked at him like he was worth saving, back when nobody else did. Ruth had ridden on the back of that chopper across 48 states. They'd never had kids, never had much of anything, but they'd had the wind and each other, and it had been enough. He told her how Ruth got sick, and how the club, all those rough men the town crossed the street to avoid, had lined up outside the hospital on their bikes, engines off, hats in their hands, the day she passed. I couldn't stay put after that, Diesel said one evening, turning his coffee cup slow. Kept writing, told myself I was looking for something, just couldn't stand to stop because when you stop, you have to feel it. He looked up at her. Then I stopped in this town, don't know why, and I saw a woman through a window up to her elbows in flour, working herself half to death and smiling at every soul who walked in. And I thought, there's somebody who lost something big, same as me. And she's still standing, so I parked. And I couldn't make myself leave. Nell felt her throat go tight. She hadn't talked about Walt to anybody, not really, not in 14 months. But she found herself telling this old stranger everything. About the empty chair in the kitchen. About how she still cooked for 2 out of habit and threw half of it out. About how the quiet had almost swallowed her whole. And for the first time since she'd buried her husband, the quiet didn't feel so heavy. There was somebody in it with her now. The town, of course, had plenty to say. They said Nell Pruitt had lost her mind. They said that biker was after her building, her money, her savings, though Lord knows she had none. They said it could only end one way, and that way was heartbreak. And they said it with that little gleam people get when they're sure they're watching a slow-motion disaster. Nell heard all of it. And you know what she did? She kept right on baking. And every afternoon at 3, she kept right on setting a warm slice of peach pie by the window on the house for the old man who'd taught her how to breathe again. One evening in late September, Diesel finished walking Biscuit and they sat out front on the iron chairs, watching the last light go out of the sky. He didn't say much. Neither did she. But at one point his big hand moved over on the table and it rested next to hers, not quite touching, and neither one of them pulled away. And Nell thought, with the warm dark coming down and the dog snoring at her feet, that maybe the worst was finally behind her. That maybe life had one more good chapter in it after all. She let herself believe it. She let herself relax. That was her mistake. Because the very next morning, before the shop was even open, the little bell over the door jangled, and a man in a pressed gray suit walked in out of the dawn with a leather folder tucked under his arm, and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Mrs. Pruitt," he said, laying a business card on the counter. "My name is Dale Hollies. I represent Meridian Development, and I'm afraid we need to have a serious conversation about your future." Just like that, everything changed. This wasn't about grief anymore. This wasn't about an old man and a lonely woman and a warm pie in the rain. This was business, and business in Cottonwood Bend had teeth. Hollies opened his folder and slid a single sheet across the counter. It was a copy of Nell's loan, the note the county bank held against her building. "Meridian Development purchased this debt from the bank 2 weeks ago," Hollies said, still smiling. "We now own it, which means we own your payment schedule. And I'll be honest with you because I respect you. You are 3 months behind. Under the terms of this note, that gives us the right to call the full balance due, all of it, $51,000, payable in 30 days. Nell felt the floor tilt. "That's not right," she said. "The bank gave me till spring." "We had an agreement." "You had an agreement with the bank," Hollies said. "You don't have one with us." He tapped the paper. "Here's the reality. This whole block, your shop, the old barber shop, the empty lot, Meridian wants it, all of it. We're putting in a highway plaza. Your little corner is right where our entrance needs to be." He spread his hands like he was doing her a favor. "So sign the building over today, walk away clean, and I'll forgive the debt. You keep your dignity. Everybody wins." "And if I don't sign?" The smile finally dropped. "Then in 30 days we foreclose. You lose the building anyway and the debt and every dime you have left trying to fight it. I've seen it 100 times. Proud folks who wait too long, they don't just lose. They lose ugly." He slid his card an inch closer. "You've got until the end of the month, I'd think fast." And he walked out, that little bell jangling behind him like it was laughing. Now Nell had been through hard things. She'd buried a husband. She'd stared down debt and grief and loneliness and come out the other side still standing. But this was a different kind of enemy. You can't outbake a corporation. You can't sweet-talk a foreclosure. She sat down hard on her stool and stared at that piece of paper, and for the first time in a long time she felt truly, completely beaten. When Diesel came by at 3, she almost didn't tell him. But he took one look at her face and set down his coffee and said, "Who?" Just that. One word, flat and hard. She told him everything. Meridian, Hollies. The 51,000, the 30 days. Diesel listened without a word. And as he listened, something changed in that old man's face. The tired went out of it and something else came in, something Nell hadn't seen before and wasn't sure she wanted pointed at her. His jaw set. His hands went still. When she finished, he stood up, put his vest back on, and said, "I've got to make some calls." "Diesel, there's nothing to be done. It's $51,000. It's a whole company. What's one man going to do against that?" He stopped at the door, one hand on the frame, and looked back. "Ma'am," he said, "I have spent 50 years learning exactly one thing. A man is never just one man. Not if he's built the right kind of life." And then he was gone, and the chopper roared, and for the first time in 3 weeks it pulled away from that curb and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. And here's where I've got to stop for 1 second. Because if this old biker and this widowed baker have gotten under your skin the way they've gotten under mine, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one, real ones about people the world wrote off, they're what this whole channel is about. Now, back to it. Because Diesel was gone for 4 days. 4 whole days. And you can imagine what the town made of that. Merle from the hardware store said he'd told everybody so. Said the biker had gotten whatever he wanted and skipped town and left the poor widow to drown. The church ladies clucked and shook their heads and felt terribly, terribly satisfied about being right. Word got around fast that Nell Pruitt was losing her shop and her biker in the same week, and wasn't that just the saddest thing, and hadn't they all seen it coming? Nell heard the whispers. She tried not to believe them. But 4 days is a long time, and the calendar kept ticking, and Diesel didn't call and didn't write and didn't come back. Late at night, alone with Biscuit and the smell of cold flour, she started to wonder if the town had been right all along. Maybe she had been a fool. Maybe warm pie and Riverstone eyes had made an old woman forget what the world was really like. On the 5th day, Dale Hollies came back. He brought papers this time, and a pen, and that same dead smile. He set them on her cracked display case and told her the deadline stood, and that her biker friend seemed to have found somewhere better to be, and wasn't it time she stopped dreaming and started signing? "You've got till Friday," he said. "9 a.m. my office. After that it's out of my hands." He clicked the pen. "Be smart, Mrs. Pruitt. Don't be one of the ugly ones." Friday, 3 days out. Now I want you to sit with where Nell was right then. 61 years old, husband in the ground, shop about to be taken. The one man who'd made her believe again, gone without a word. The whole town watching and whispering and certain of the ending. If you've ever felt the walls come in on every side at once, then you know exactly the kind of dark she was standing in. She barely slept. She barely baked. She just moved through those 3 days like a ghost in her own shop, waiting for the axe to fall. Thursday night she made one last peach pie. Not to sell. Just to make. Because it was the pie that had started it all, and because if she was going to lose everything on Friday morning, then by God, she was going to lose it smelling like her own kitchen. She set it on the rack to cool, turned off the lights, and cried for the first time since the funeral. Then she wiped her face, locked up, and went to bed not knowing how she'd get through the morning. And Friday morning came. That brings us right back to where we started, to the gray suit and the cracked display case and the rolling pin in her white-knuckled hand. because Hollies got tired of waiting for her to come to his office. He came to her instead first thing, with two men in polo shirts and a clipboard and a locksmith, ready to change the locks the second the clock hit 9. He walked in like he already owned the place. He slammed his fist on that counter, and the old glass case cracked corner to corner, and he leaned in close and told her she was out of time and out of options, and she'd better sign or be dragged out. And when she didn't move, when she just stood there with that rolling pin and refused to give an inch, he lost his patience and reached across the counter for her wrist. That's when the engine roared. It didn't come from across the street. It came from up the highway, from the north, from far off. And it wasn't one engine. Nell heard it before she understood it. A low, rolling thunder that came up out of the ground and shook the windows in their frames. Hollies heard it too. He straightened up, his hand still out, his head turning toward the door. They came over the rise at the edge of town like a river of chrome and leather. Motorcycles. Not 2, not 10. More than 60 of them, riding 2 by 2, headlights on in the morning sun, engines howling, and every last one of them wearing the same faded patch on their backs. They came down Main Street of Cottonwood Bend at a slow, rolling crawl, and the whole town came out onto the sidewalks with their mouths hanging open, because nobody, in the entire history of that little dusty place, had ever seen anything like it. And at the front of them all, on that long black chopper worn soft from 100,000 miles, rode Diesel Marlowe. They pulled up outside the pie shop and shut their engines down, one after another, until the silence that came after was the loudest thing Nell had ever heard. Diesel got off his bike slow. He walked in through her front door, ducking under the frame, and he crossed to the counter, and he put himself between Nell and Dale Hollies like a wall going up. "Take your hand off her," Diesel said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Hollies pulled his hand back. He tried the smile, but it wouldn't hold. "This is a legal matter," he said. "This building is in default. I have every right to." "You had a right to a debt," Diesel said. "Had, past tense." He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded stack of papers and dropped them on the cracked glass. "I bought that note off Meridian 4 days ago. Took some doing. Took every brother I've got making phone calls and calling in favors. Took a man in Phoenix who owed me from a long time ago. But it's done. That $51,000, paid, in full, this morning. You don't own a nickel of Nell Prewitt's life anymore, Mr. Hollies. Fact is, you're standing in a building that's been paid clear, bothering the owner, and I count about 62 witnesses who'd say you laid hands on her first." The shop was dead silent. Hollies picked up the papers with a shaking hand and read them. Nell watched the color drain right out of his gray face. It was real. The note was paid. The debt was gone. And the highway plaza that needed her little corner just lost the one piece it couldn't build without. Hollies didn't say another word. He gathered up his men and his clipboard and his locksmith, and he walked out through a wall of leather and silence, and he got in his car and he drove out of Cottonwood Bend, and nobody there ever saw him again. Now Nell was shaking so hard she had to hold the counter. "Diesel," she whispered. How on earth did you get $51,000? And here's the part that broke the whole town's heart wide open. The old man looked down at his boots for a second. Then he looked back up at her, and that tired came back into his gray eyes, soft now. "Sold the bike," he said. Nell's hand flew to her mouth. That chopper, 50 years of road. The bike Ruth had ridden across 48 states. The last thing he had left of the only other life that ever meant anything to him. "You can't," she said. "Diesel, no, that's Ruth's, that's your hole." "It's a machine," he said, and his voice caught just a little. "It got me here. It got me to you. That's the best thing it ever did, and it's done it now." He shook his head slow. "Ruth wouldn't have wanted me sitting on a pile of chrome while a good woman lost her whole life to a man in a suit. Ruth would have walked across the street in the rain with a warm pie, same as you did. He swallowed hard. You gave me back my life with a peach pie, Nell. I'm not going to sit still and watch some vulture take yours. The men outside had heard it all through the open door. And one by one, those 60 rough, scarred, leather-wearing men, the ones this whole town had crossed the street to avoid, took their hats off and held them against their chests. Then Diesel Marlowe did the thing that would leave Cottonwood Ben talking for years. He got down. Slow, one knee at a time, because a man his age and his size doesn't kneel easy, right there on the flour-dusted floor of that little pie shop in front of the whole town, and he reached into the pocket of that faded vest and brought out a small worn box. And when he opened it, there was a ring inside. Not Ruth's. A new one, small and simple, that he'd bought with the last little bit of money he had left after the bike. "Eleanor Prewitt," he said, and his rough voice shook. "I told you the first day. I warned you. A woman feeds me a warm meal and my whole life turns around. It's happened twice now in one lifetime, and I don't figure a man gets a third, so I'm not going to waste this one waiting." He held that ring up in his big scarred hand. "I know I'm old. I know I'm rough. I know this town thinks you've lost your mind. But I have got maybe 15 good years left in me, and I would like to spend every one of them fixing your oven and walking your dog and eating your pie across that table by the window. Will you marry me, Nell?" And the whole town leaned in to hear her answer. Nell looked down at that old biker on his knee on her kitchen floor, this mountain of a man who'd sold the last of his old life to save the last of hers, and she started to laugh and cry at the same time, and she said the only thing there was to say. "Somebody," she said, "get this man a slice of pie. He's going to need his strength." Which everybody understood to mean yes. And the shop erupted. 60 grown men, hard as the road, cheering and stomping and pounding each other on the back, and Biscuit barking his fool head off, and Nell down on the floor with her arms around Diesel Marlowe's thick neck, and the ring going on her finger where it would stay for the rest of both their lives. They were married 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning, right out front of the pie shop, with the whole street closed off. The preacher was a hard old man who'd ridden with the club for 40 years and kept a Bible in one saddlebag. The church ladies came, too, every one of them. They'd done a whole lot of whispering, and I won't pretend they hadn't, but there's not a woman alive who can resist a wedding. And by the end they were crying into their handkerchiefs and swearing they'd known all along that biker was a gentleman. Merle from the hardware store gave the bride away. He said Walt would have wanted a man there to do it, and he figured he was the closest thing on hand. Nell hugged him so hard she about cracked a rib. The club chipped in and bought Diesel a new motorcycle. Nothing fancy, but every one of those men had put a little something toward it, because a brother without a bike, they said, was a bird without a sky. Diesel cried when they rolled it up. A big old man crying right there on Main Street. Nobody said a word about it. Some things a man's earned the right to. And the shop lived. Word of what happened spread far past Cottonwood Bend. Folks started riding in from 3 counties over just to see the pie shop the biker saved, and to meet the old outlaw who'd sold his soul on wheels for a widow and her hound. Business got so good Nell had to hire 2 girls from the high school to help her keep up. She put in a second oven. She never once had to smack the side of it, because Diesel kept both of them running like clockwork, on his knees with his leather roll of wrenches, same as that very first afternoon. Every day at 3 he still walked Biscuit down to the dry riverbed and back. And every day at 3 there was a warm slice of peach pie waiting for him on the table by the window when he got home. On the house. Always on the house. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, and it's the thing this whole town finally understood. Everybody had been so sure they were watching a disaster. A lonely widow and a dangerous stranger, they said. It can only end in heartbreak. And they were watching so hard for the ending they were sure was coming that they nearly missed the story that was actually happening right in front of them. A story about two people the world had counted out. Two people carrying more grief than a body ought to carry. Two people who found, late in the game, in a dusty little town on the edge of nowhere, that it is never, ever too late for a warm thing on a cold day. Nell went back sometimes in her mind to that rainy Tuesday. To the moment she stood at her window and looked out at a soaked old stranger who looked exactly the way she felt on the inside. She could have stayed behind that counter. She could have minded her own business, kept her walls up, kept herself safe and alone and slowly disappearing. Most people would have. Most people do. Instead, she wrapped a warm pie in a clean towel and she walked out into the rain and she set it down in front of a man everybody told her to be afraid of. And that one small kindness, that one warm pie, it turned two whole lives around. Diesel had warned her that very first day. "Careful, ma'am. The last woman who fed me got a ring." She'd laughed it off. She'd thought it was just a rough old man's sad joke. Turned out he meant every word.